Oh,
Can you still hear me now?
yeah. Is there a specific topic today or?
Okay, so I was yapping for about 3 minutes. No one was hearing me, so I'll redo it all over again. So I don't know if we caught that first part about the sessions being recorded, but all usernames are redacted and such. Just the profile pictures are showing, and then your boxes will glow when you speak. Today's topics regarding labor, means of production, and reconstruction or reproduction and deconstruction of our schemes. So most of the conversation is going to be about labor. So I'll open it up for a few more seconds if anyone has any questions or any more comments before we start. All right, looks like we're on the same page. Today we'll be starting with three terms, very familiar terms that we should all be familiar with. Labor, AI, and technology to start us off with. So of course we know all about labor. Labor is that thing that we all do every single day, even when we breathe, go to the bathroom, take a shit, hang out with our friends, do stuff that we need to, go to a job. Labor, it is the exertion of the self, of the person, right? The investment of time into processes, and those various processes then materialize various values that we are able to consume. So through the job, we are able to labor ourselves, materialize what's called a paycheck at the end of that laboring period. That paycheck is the compensation of our investment of time and labor into these processes that the companies and the corporations, enterprises compensate us with so that we don't revolt and retaliate and ask for more, right? So labor is a very common theme through means of production and producing and how people do stuff and get stuff done. Nothing can get done without labor, and if anything were to be done without labor, it would be completely ideal. Everything is done through hand making stuff, doing stuff, and putting stuff and rearranging stuff together for our materialization of values and consumption of those values. So labor, as we know, is just doing stuff as people do normally. We're all very familiar with it. And the next term is AI, artificial intelligence. And I'm pretty sure we're all also very familiar with this term, this AI, this artificial thing. But as technology and as it stands now, the use of that AI, right, not particularly well taken. We do not like how AI and technology is being used right now. More because it is a bourgeois, right, bourgeois use this technology for their bourgeois interest, and so therefore we do not like how they use it. AI not, pr- progressing the production of our systems in a proletariat way, in a pro-worker friendly way. As we see AI, quote unquote, taking jobs, it is also destroying the environment. It is also doing a lot of things that are not very proletariat. That is bourgeois aligning. But that is simply because of the way that it is being used. Technology and AI, in the way it's being used now, it can be identified in the relationships that we observe it in its material conditions, in the relationship in between our labor, and how we see that technology being used by its owners, and the owners of production, and the owners of our being when it comes to producing and making things. So, our organization of production, owned by particular interest, therefore, all products produced will be in that interest, in this case, bourgeois interest. So, when we are labor ourselves in these processes at these companies, let's say at a Walmart, at an Amazon, at a restaurant, or any part of business enterprise in our organization of production, labor and the interest of that labor is being directed towards private interest or bourgeois interest. And so therefore AI and technology, the results of that labor also conform to these interests, these bourgeois interests. So labor, AI, and technology, all of these things inside of production help improve the processes of production, right, from a particular perspective. And from the bourgeois perspective, labor and AI technology are no more than means of attaining a profit, means of attaining this accumulation of value, which keeps these systems in place, keeps these oppressive systems in place that we are shackled under, of course. So it is our own labor and the results of our own labor, the technology, the tools, the AI, that is keeping us in our oppressive state. Not by choice, of course, we don't choose to live this way, but our labor and the tools that we have materialized are owned, and they're owned by a state backed or a state protected through a military, the ownership of these objects. And so we talk about ownership, we obviously go to the means of production, right? So the means of production is our labor, is the AI that we talked about, technology, and all the means that all the things that produce the means to produce such things. So when we talk about the means to produce, we could talk about the means of producing clean water. We could talk about the means of producing safe and edible food to eat, right? That's safe. We could talk about the means of producing transportation. Anything that you can think of in action and the means to produce that, the ownership of production obviously controls those means. In our state, it is bourgeois or the privately owned who owns those means. It's not public. And so without that publicity, when it comes to owning the means of production, the results of those productions, right, the products and the profits realized go towards a private interest. So in our talkings about labor, AI technology, means of production, we're obviously talking about it in the context of proletariat, bourgeois, uh, quote unquote good or bad, but more realistically, ownership and non-ownership. So we talk about ownership of objects, we're talking about people having things. And it is this having of things that grant the ability, the individual owner of that object, right, that owner, the means of producing with whatever that they own. So there exists someone out there, CEO of Arrowhead or the other water companies that own clean water, at least the means to produce clean water. Someone out there has that right, and it is a right protected by the state. And I don't know about you, but that sounds a little ridiculous. It's just a single person or hand group of people or shareholder board. I would say less than 100 people in the world own the means to produce clean water. Nestle, definitely for sure, do not like them. That is completely gross. But as we know, it is through the state that protects these rights. It is the state, through its military, that allows for these transactions. And after you have this state, you have the individual in their social strata. They have the individual in their scheme of life, believing and conforming to these ideas as we have discussed last week, these throne conditions that the individual experiences taken for granted, right? Because as you are born, you don't question the systems in place that you harbor and you exist and live in, right? When you're upon birth, you don't just start questioning the government. There are reasons to question the government. You don't just start questioning big corporations or why they have billions of dollars. You have reasons to question those billions of dollars of profit. And so from that reasoning, you get the socialist or the communist or the individual that is antithetical to capitalism. Because questions start bringing answers, those answers start filling in the holes of the Swiss cheese of life. Right? You are thrown into your life. You're born at a certain time period, under certain conditions, under particular conditions or whatnot. You are here, you are born. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean you exist in a caste system. Being born simply is just here with your labor, with your means of living, right? With your technology and AI, if you were born in a hospital, if you were born somewhere else, right? All of your conditions were thrown in. And part of those conditions is corporations, billionaires, and all of the means of production that are owned by a private interest. We take it for granted upon birth. It is not until we forward our understanding, uncover the material conditions for what they are by means of analysis, that we get to such conclusions that, hey, capitalism might not be such a great mode of production when it comes to, and this is where we get our antithesis, human rights, where we get stop marginalizing people that don't be marginalized, stop oppressing people. And it all comes through various different ideologies, philosophies from the capitalist system. But what we do know, and for sure, that the capitalist system is founded on a production of ownership, specifically private ownership. And that private ownership includes what we talked about, the labor, the AI, technology, all of the means to produce, the means of production. And is the ownership of the means of production that allow for this type of system to manifest or to materialize. That is why we go to work, get our paychecks. That is why people don't usually organize and build community, because that is not within the scheme of life the bourgeois people and institutions have provided for us. Of course, the bourgeois scheme of life that we have been provided is to get a job, get educated, or go to school and all that, right? Conform to the system, uphold systems of capital through your means of being, and that means of being is simply just vote blue no matter who or back the red, right? Your political systems are adjacent to your quality of life, which is why most people don't get into politics. But as we talked about last week, bourgeois politics not very interesting. So people would like to leave that on the sidelines, as I said, is adjacent to the individual life. And so what comes up in the individual life is the social conditions. So what does this mean? So from our labor and the means of production and all the other productions and all the other systems in place, it seems to be that the scheme of life of the individual living in the imperial core or in America, that politics and the economy live secondary to the social standards and to the social beings of our society. And so it is the social constructs that need to be fixed and repaired. It is the social beings that we all inhabit in the society that we live in that need to be fixed. Not so much the production, not so much the policy, a little bit more so, but more so not so much the production, how we do stuff, how we make ourselves, how we organize ourselves in labor, in our technology and our means. People think that we have past that. We have fixed the means of production. We have fixed already from our feudal lords and kings and queens. We have fixed how business is supposed to be done. Now, what is left there to be done? Obviously, to fix the society, the social standards, the social decorum which the individual lives in. And that is where we get the liberalism, as where we get the ideologies of the rights to own and ownership. This is these various things that we talk about in our bourgeois politics and our politics in general, how we organize as a society. Now, most people think we've solved the production part, which is where people just go outright and say, there's nothing wrong with businesses and billionaires and people owning all this. It is how we organize our society that is where the problem is. And of course, through our analysis and especially our material analysis, we know this not to be very true, at least to the perspective of the dialectic and the perspective of the materialist, who understands the material conditions make the conditions that or make the people that we see and interact with. It is the material conditions that make the ideologies and the strata and the social the social decorums, and all of the things that we exist in. Right? It is backed by the I exist, therefore I think, therefore I am kind of ideology. So instead of the traditional I think, therefore I am, right, where the individual embodies what their thought is, the individual must understand that their material conditions are thrown in. They are just here. And so from these material conditions, we then analyze what is around us. Then and only then do we discern a particular conclusion, right? The conclusion that can only come up from a relationship discussed or observed. Right. So in our instances, when we talk about economy and the production, it is a bourgeois and proletariat relationship, or it is the non-owned and the owners of production, the individuals who sell their labor and the individuals who buy the labor. Right. There always must be a consideration of relationship when making such an analysis on our material conditions. So without this analysis, we would just be left lost, confused, right? Most individuals living in the imperial core do feel that way, right? They feel like the system offers no solution or no conclusion to our material conditions. We all believe, or at least the liberals, the individuals who feel lost and concerned, do not have the dialectic understanding of the material conditions, so therefore their conclusions are left a little bit lackworthy, or is it? It's just lacking. So, in our analysis and what we're gathered here today, thank you all, is to understand our material conditions. And so, to go back from the beginning, we talked about labor and how we labor, AI and technology, and all of the things that cause the means of production, or the means to produce. So, AI, as far as the way I use it, is means to produce automated emails, means to produce funny, quirky prompts every now and then, right? AI and technology in the way it's used now is very individualistic. It's not there to help the people, not to help the community, and that is all by design. Technology and AI and the means of producing these stuffs in our economy and in our social spaces are all individualistic, which is all a common item and a common trait that the systems of capital reproduce. So before we go on to the idea of reproduction, we're going to do a really recap. We're just going to go briefly over labor, AI, and technology, and the means of production as we still have before we move on. So as we know, labor will do stuff. AI, a product of that labor, because nothing doesn't just spawn in out of nowhere. People make stuff and then we have stuff. That's like past products of labor. So we have our labor and the technology and AI, the means of production, the ownership of production, and how people and the state and how that backs the ownership of that. Because what's to stop me from going into a Walmart, taking something off the shelf, and then walking out? Well, obviously, it is or it is the conditions that don't allow me to. It is the state. It is there might be private security on the Walmart. There could be a lot of things that prevent me from taking this private property, which is recognized and owned by a private interest or a private enterprise. And so we go now into the processes of reproduction. So we've discussed what is labor, what is AI, what is technology, what is the ownership of production. But what is reproduction? And it is a very essential concept to understand, especially when it comes to attempting to reproduce socialist means of producing. So capitalist reproduces this system of production, this mode of production by various means. And we're going to talk about one, unemployment. Unemployment is one of those means at which they use or fiddle with to reproduce the systems of capital. So when it comes to labor and buying labor power from the capitalist point of view, you always want a consistent supply of that. When everyone works, there is not much of a leverage that the capitalist has when it comes to buying your labor. Everyone has it. A very basic bourgeois economic supply and demand. There's a bunch of supply, there's no demand. So if you have the unemployment sector existing and being there, there exists a population in the pool of labor that isn't working, that isn't getting a paycheck, that isn't doing all of this laboring and stuff. So when we reproduce these conditions, we must consider how we reproduce, what conditions result in reproduction in a potential socialist society. But we'll further analyze the capitalist society and their modes or in their means of reproduction. So not only does employment reproduce these systems of capital, but it also helps the individual in the society believe that it must be this way. So it's what this ought to be, what not to be kind of scheme in our society. Just like how we exist in throw, we take this for granted. So there must be unemployment, right? The individual looks at unemployment, such a large figure, and it is there before they were born and throughout their continuous experience of life. They perceive and observe this phenomena, unemployment. So therefore, the individual, without forward, without reasoning and questioning, assumes that the existence of unemployment must be there. And so, upon perception, right, with a key aspect of reproduction, these systems of capital go ahead and have way with their existing schemes, unemployment, low wages, ownership, private ownership of their property, which is another reproductive process, is private ownership, which is backed by the state. But everything is all connected, right? Nothing is not all connected. Everything is connected to some which way or matter or whatnot. It just takes enough time to find that connection. So from reproduction, we go to deconstruction. So as we talked about reproductive processes and how these processes reproduce themselves, how the unemployment get jobs to further the capitalist agenda, and how individuals lose their job going back into the pool of unemployment where they don't have that sustainable paycheck or where they don't have the means to produce such preferred material conditions, right? Or through their paycheck or through their attaining of monies. So reproduction, a very important process to understand when it comes to building a system, and capitalism, as we have analyzed and observed, and many more examples can become apparent about these systems of capital. Sorry, I was reading the comments. So obviously Karl Marx said taking guns around. So as revolutionaries, how do we feel in regards to means production and improvise? Anti-tyranny. Anti-tyranny devices like mutual aid and other communal oriented means of action. Oh well, yeah, okay. So we will always need to take up arms so if revolution requires violence. I'm not a big believer of non-violence when it comes to revolutionizing. We will need to take up all avenues for the proletariat, or at least for our revolutionaries, to materialize such a value, such as a revolution. So we'll be using all means at which, this is what I was getting to, reproducing such socialist values. So when we take upon arms and we take upon systems and processes to revolutionize, we do so very carefully. We cannot reproduce capitalist values in our actions. That's what happened, kind of what happened in the USSR. They relied too much on the systems of capital as they were transitioning into socialism, and so which led to their downfall back into capitalism. So regardless of how we do it, we either through state capitalism or we do it through other means of attempting socialism, we must do so in light of understanding that we must reproduce socialist values. So we cannot have an unemployment. Under a socialist, production in a society, we cannot have employment. That is not something that we should be aiming to have. We should be aiming, of course, to fix it. But how do we do that? We provide people jobs. We provide people doing stuff. And so I researched this mechanism device. Oh yeah, for sure, for sure. We're always looking for our comrades to help out and whatnot. So we always love when we work together because when we work together, stuff happens. So we're gonna get right back into it with deconstruction. So we talked about reproduction, how we need to reproduce processes, and the reproduction of systems is integral to a system's growth. Right? Capitalism has unemployment, socialism won't. And so when we talk about deconstruction, we're talking about what we need to realize in our material conditions and what we need to question and analyze. So from a material perspective, of course. So deconstruction is breaking down what I would say is individualism. It's breaking down the walls at what makes the individual exist in a capitalist society. So deconstructing also goes towards deconstructing the taught liberal values, the taught imperial values, and the taught scheme of life that goes hand in hand with business, enterprise, private ownership, and private business. So we must look forward, or we must look towards alternatives that construct antithetical thought to the US imperialism that most, if not all, Americans have been subjected under. So deconstruction versus reproduction is like a taking down bourgeois scheme of life and trying to implement proletariat scheme of life. And of course, proletariat is more community, more talk to talk, help each other out, understanding each other first and foremost, very important. We must be able to understand each other, and that comes from a patient analysis. And so patient analysis is completely opposite, or at least antithetical to the reactionary scheme of life that most bourgeois, if not all bourgeois and liberal individuals in a society take upon or take under. It is the saying no to reactionary schemes. It is saying no to this must be this way, do not question it. We look forward to and we encourage questioning when it comes to our material conditions. That is the only way that we know we live, how we live, like how we be. On an existential meaning and being, on a philosophical take, our being exists in the material conditions. And so we must and cannot do anything else but analyze those conditions at which we exist in. So when it comes to deconstruction, we do the same process. We look at our environment and we look at our material conditions and we observe such conditions and we do everything to analyze and question everything and come to a synthesis of some sort during that dialectic process to understand why these things are the way they are, right? You must understand why we have an unemployment. You must understand why there is a private ownership of labor power or purchased labor power. You must understand why there exists AI in the state that it does. Because from an existential point of view, AI is no more than just things doing stuff. Just like how everyone is just people doing stuff, right? When people labor, they do stuff. Upon further analysis, we see that AI to be a very competent tool when it comes to production because it can automize stuff. And that automation isn't inherently evil. Automation is just simply stuff doing stuff without us doing stuff. I put it very simply. It is the human not doing anything, but then still stuff happening. That's pretty much the core essence of automation. And so AI can do that very effectively. And as we can see, it does it very effectively. AI can automate things like emails, signups, clicks. It can automate your expense reports, and whatnot. It can do a lot. But of course, as we talked about, in the ways that it's being used, it's not very great, at least right now. So a part of that deconstruction as well is to, of course, recognize AI as a particular evil in our instance, but also to recognize that AI isn't inherently evil. Just like how, well, okay, so billionaires are inherently evil because of the way they do stuff. But when we look at other objects, technology as a whole, the development of such, not inherently evil or bad, it is the way that these objects are being used. Just like humans. Humans aren't inherently bad, it's just the way they're being used, or the way that they act and be, which is where we get that analysis, that relationship or definable relationship that we can observe. So people aren't inherently bad or evil. It is the stuff that they do, and it is the stuff that they align themselves with. And the individuals in an observable relationship, like, of course, let's say their actions, that is what makes something particularly bad or good within perception. But of course, morals, good and bad, are all within perception. It's all subjective. But I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole. That's a whole moral philosophy. So when it comes to deconstruction, we must analyze everything. We must become present and aware of the conditions that surround ourselves with, and of course, question the conditions that other people are surrounded with, because we are no more than a product of our material conditions. We are just a product of what we are, who we are, and how we are because of what we exist in, not because of who we inherently are, not just because we're born in a certain demographic or born in a certain way or born in a certain social strata. It is what we intake in our material conditions that make the individual. So we shouldn't press too hard on why individuals the way they are because of who they are intrinsically, but we must question why the individual is what they are because of their material conditions. That is how we better understand our surroundings, because we would do the same thing to ourselves. Right? We are not inherently bad as us, the individual. We're not inherently XYZ. It is because of the product of our material conditions. It is the means and access to such expressions that allow for the individual to change. So, reproductive processes help encourage that change. Deconstructive processes, of course, deconstruct or hinder that change. And so, from the process of reproduction and deconstruction, we understand that the individual lives in a kind of fluid or forever changing set of conditions where nothing is just stagnant, right? Because there are forces that always act upon, right? Perceivably always in near infinity, act upon the individual. From physics, gravity exists all the time, unless you're in space. If you're on Earth, gravity always exists. It's just a fundamental law or a rule that happens to just be here. But upon further analysis, right, and especially considering a broader perspective, gravity itself does not always exist everywhere to such degree that we experience it here on Earth. And the same things can be said about our political perspectives when it comes to our, ideologies and our contradictions and constraints when it comes to talking about our politics. Not everything exists in the same capacity as it does everywhere. So not everyone's going to experience the same oppression as one group may do under a particular rule or under a particular set of policies. Now, that doesn't mean that it doesn't exist. We know that gravity exists. If you were in space, just floating around, you would say that gravity doesn't exist because it doesn't affect you. But of course, as we all know here living on Earth, gravity does very much well exist. And so if you can draw those parallels, you can kind of see how individuals can just get lost in the sauce in a certain way about how certain policies don't affect them, how certain policies are quote unquote useless, don't vote for them, or don't have them, don't talk about them. It is all within the individual perspective and perception which creates the scheme of life. So all of that labor, AI, technology, reproduction, deconstruction, all of that is all within perception and perspective. So I'm just going to take a little couple seconds, grab some water. If anyone has any questions, ask it now. I'm going to be taking a couple swigs before we get back into it. All right, it looks like we're on the same page here. So going right along, we're going to go into more the ownership of production. So I know we touched on it a little bit. We're going to go into it, and then we're going to be analyzing a relationship of work, labor versus ownership of that work and labor. Or more specifically, the right to work in production versus the rights to own production. So in our general chat, we or side chat, whichever chat, we talked about how the UWA, one of the unions, was divesting from Israel, which is great. Which is not a bad thing, right? We want all divestment from Israel as soon as possible, as much as possible, arms embargo. We want all of that. We want that genocide to fucking stop. But in light of our material and real politics, a divestment is a good direction. But understanding that a divestment is also a reinvestment because money just doesn't disappear. If money is being taken out, it is being inserted somewhere else. So when it comes to unions, the unions have historically always fought for the individual workers' right to work, never to own production, right? Unions exist to work. Unions exist to propel the systems of capital for work, or at least they're socialist aligning existing in capitalist systems. Because there would be no existences of unions in a socialist society. Everyone would work. There would be no workers' rights under a socialist society. Everyone would have a quote unquote inherent right to work, right? Forced by the state, of course, is how we see it right now. The right to work is not, I want to say, inherently good either, because the right to work just means the right to labor. And the right to labor just means you are expressing yourself or the individual invest time and labor into particular processes that either or give or don't a value consume right from the individual. Most of the value that we get in a consumable is a paycheck, so that paycheck is a neutral interest when it comes to production, because the paycheck is more like a buy-off or a compensation from the worker for their time and their labor into that enterprise, that process, into making those products. The capitalist hates to see that portion of the profit go, but the worker loves to see that paycheck raise. And so the union or the individual organization of that labor pushes the right to work, but never to own production. So this is where I get the rub. As a previous union employee for UPS, it was kind of weird that unions were always seeking the right to work in production, not own production, which is of course where we see the root problem of capitalism. It is who owns the production, and not just only who owns the production, but how that individual owner, right, uses that production or the means to produce. So the ownership of production is never on the table when it comes to negotiations, right? In unions, it's always the right to work, raising the wage, right? Getting that so many percentages or many dollars raises for however many years in the contract, right? Better working conditions, not owning those working conditions, but just better working conditions. But this is not to say that, and I'm a big union hater. We love our unions. We want to make sure that our unions stay strong because they're socialist aligning. I would say they're a gateway drug into a broader consideration of theory and perspective when it comes to production. But unions exist in our spaces to provide us that avenue. Because most people, especially here in the imperial core, don't understand what socialism and communism means. They're thrown into their perception as they were born in the systems of capital or in the U.S. education system. As right now, my little brother, who just came back from school, talked to me about how they talked about capitalism, and of course, him being a commie pill, brat, that guy understands the lies being told in class, how communism is bad, boo, but capitalism is good, yeah, and how communism doesn't work, and capitalism always works, yeah. That's exactly, to go along with what they said in class about the modes and systems of production. And guess what? They're going to go tomorrow in class and then just not talk about it any further, more beyond to that point, which is the problem that we see in our education or in our classes, which is the very first point or an entry point for the individual to understand these concepts. And our first impressions make a big deal or make a big imprint, and it does. When most individuals hear about something for the first time, they're hearing about it not just for the first time, but the very first existence and point of that being within perception. And so that quote unquote object or that notion or idea then gets aligned with whatever was said about it. So if the first time you very first hear about communism and you say or you hear that people are saying that it's bad, well then yeah, the individual's going to go ahead and assume that okay, maybe communism is bad. capitalism is good. Of course, the individual doesn't really understand what they're knowing or saying, but that's not to the fault of the individual. It is the fault of the education institution that is pushing that onto individuals. So, which is why we have these quite lovely political discussions where we can yap and talk and listen about other alternatives besides the capitalist mode of thought. So that's why we're here, to understand the differences between the right to work and the right to own production. Because it's cool to work and get a paycheck. I'm not saying that, a big paycheck is not a good thing. I'm saying the existence of the paycheck itself is bad. Because the existence of the paycheck itself reproduces these systems of capital. You have a paycheck, you have an individual working for that paycheck, you have individual working, period. That's the end all be all. The individual works. They don't own production. The individual doesn't go into work and for so many hours in the day or in the month, they dictate the actions of the company. Oh, let's do this a little different. No, let's load packages different this way. No, we can order parts differently and say, but the individual worker does not go into work, as an administrator, but goes into work as a laborer. And so, yeah, big paychecks are nice. I'm not saying, I like when I had a big paycheck. I'm not here to brag, but I was making those six figures. But that six figures wasn't compensating my mental. It wasn't compensating my well-being, and it wasn't compensating my thought and thirst for knowledge, and thought and thirst for understanding why we work in the way we work. So, as a union member and as a white collar, the right to work is adjacent to the right to, oh, I won't put it lightly, to be owned. So the rights of the ownership of production within the state, and the rights of the ownership of production includes, and then production is labor. Production is the individual laborer, the technology, the AI, right? The things to produce such things. These capitalists and these private owners own all of that. So therefore they own the labor power that they purchase from you, from your wage. So think of it like this. The right to work. You have the individual working for a paycheck for a rate. And so let's say that rate is $20 an hour. And so the individual owner of production eats a cost of $20 per hour. But most of the time they see it as an annual or a monthly salary. So that's like what? $30,000, $20 an hour, something like that. It's not a lot. But to the capitalist, it is a necessary cost for them to reproduce their profits, because the capitalist needs the worker to reproduce themselves. And so if you commodify all of the goods and the services, and you make everything a transaction through the means of money, or as I like to call the physical monetary exchange, then of course the individual relies on the paycheck. The individual relies on this form that the capitalist gives so the individual can sustain their material conditions, right? It's not granted or given that this paycheck just exists as is and is something that's necessary, just like how people may believe that unemployment is necessary because they are thrown into that concept. Paychecks themselves too are thrown concepts that are like, oh no, if I'm a worker and I need to have food and a house and a shelter and water, I need to have money. And that money, of course, comes from the paycheck. And so they go down the rabbit hole of, well, if I'm a worker and I do this, I don't own production, I just work. And that's where you get the individual lost in the sauce, not really understanding why the material conditions are such that way. But it's all down to the right to work and the right to own production, right? Unions push the right to work, which is the bigger paycheck. And of course, the bourgeois people have the right to own production, which is the issuing of that paycheck. So who do you think makes a little bit more money? The individual who works for that paycheck or the individual who issues that paycheck, right? The cost of a paycheck is a necessary cost for the bourgeois, for the capitalists, to maintain their status as owners of production so that the individuals or workers can reproduce themselves at work, because a capitalist needs a laboring force, because God forbid the capitalists labor themselves, right? God forbid they actually go down to the floor, help a customer out, stock a shelf, stock packages, move packages around, drive those semi trucks full of those goods. God forbid any of them do that, because they don't labor, right? So it is the laborer and the individual who buys the labor the right to work in labor, the individual who owns the production that requires the labor. So we live in a buy and be bought world, own or be owned world, and it always has been like that. Don't let the terminology of accounting associates, or don't let the CEO and CFO positions fool you into believing that we have moved past feudalism and we have moved past monarchy. Think of it like this. We think of monarchies, kings and queens, and feudals like kingdoms. Why should we treat businesses any different? Kingdoms are just big pieces of enterprises for a particular interest that own a lot of land or own a lot of stuff. So businesses act in the same way. Walmart's, Amazon's, other businesses, they all and Nestle all own a bunch of stuff. And so you have this hierarchy form of power in their right to own production that's similar and aligns with the monarchy type of organization of production and society. It's where you have one guy, or at least a king of court, a court of some sort, at the top of this hierarchy that makes all the decisions for the kingdom. I mean, for the company. And so from those decisions, it trickles down from the top of the manners of the Lord. I mean, the management, all the way down to the serfs. I mean, the workers. Of course, we're talking about the workers. And so, yes, exactly. Feudal slavery never ended. It just evolved and it reproduced itself out of such slave conditions. So, we're going back to reproduction. The systems that reproduce feudalism evolved into capitalism because there is still an own and or ownership and be owned type of dynamic when it comes to analyzing our mode of production, this capitalist mode of production. Not so different than how we used to do it, right? When we had kings and queens, now we just have a voluntary action or a more a free kind of aspect to our action in society. So no more are we quote unquote forced to work. We can choose to work and we can choose to sell our labor to these manors, to these kingdoms and companies. We can choose whether or not our the skill sets or whatnot are worth 20, 30, 40, or 50 or so dollars an hour. So as a mechanic, we're going to go to a little me lore here. As a mechanic, I noticed that shops, of course, like any other industry, pay differently. So some shops you would get paid $20 an hour. Some shops paid flat rate, which is pay per job. So say if you have 5 jobs in one day, but one job on the other day, you only get paid for the one job on the one day and 5 jobs on the other day. So flat rate, hourly, different pay scales, different unions and stuff. It's all sort of this free market which the individual can pursue and express themselves. And the free market itself is a reproductive process when it comes to systems of capital. In a socialist society, we wouldn't necessarily have these kinds of markets. People would just work. People will just be here and labor for the interests of I guess, the social need, or I guess the state. Because in these systems and the modes of capital, push the capitalist private individual interest, right? So as the owner of production, right, that one king, that one guy, or the king of courts, the CEO or the shareholders, the board of directors that choose, not just choose, but also have all of the profits from the production, which were allowed to be owned, right, backed by the state. So we see all of these things, these processes happening, the rights to work from our unions and the rights to own from our businesses and the state. And it is such a wonderful dynamic because the dynamic is very observable. And it always goes back to the proletariat and the bourgeois relationship, right? The people who sell their labor, people who buy the labor, people who work, and people who don't work. Because obviously, bourgeois individuals don't work, they just own stuff. And then there's that ownership of stuff, in which another book goes into great detail about how the entire theory of owning stuff is actually just a signifier of a social status, and that is where we get our social drive. So that book was by Thorstein Veblen, Theory of the Leisure Class. It was more so a social take on our production, whereas Karl Marx, of course, has analyzed our production economically, where individuals own the production, individuals work the production, and how that relationship exists as like a slave and owner or an exploitive relationship. In our social understanding, it's no different. Individuals who own a lot of stuff are therefore seen as quote unquote like wealthy, successful, or in any positive denominator you would want to use, right? So that's why we see celebrities with their big mansions. Oh, you must be so successful. Or you see a bunch of like a billionaire having a lot of money. Oh, he must be so successful for having all that stuff. And that is the consideration under the scheme of life in a capitalist society, right? Individuals only envy a lot of wealth when the wealth is the goal. So when you make wealth the goal, you obviously make the alignment of that like that wealth positive or good or something to attain and desire, something to become or reproduce themselves. So all within the scheme of life, all within how we live in our being, in our socials, in our economics, in our politics, determines our beings. So from our social standpoint, capital, right, and ownership of capital in our current state is very desired. You want to own a business. You want to be able to have a lot of money. You want to have this freedom to produce and have the ownership of, because that's what society calls you upon. If you're not going to work and go to college, you want to start a business. And that is the two ultimatums the individual has when living in a capitalist society. It's either work or own the work. And so we're coming up on that glorious 5 o'clock or that 8 o'clock, depending on where you're at, time. So about 5 minutes left. I've one last thing to say before we get to that. I'm gonna take another water. So if anyone has any questions or want to say anything right now, you can. I'll just give you guys a couple seconds. Water. Not done yet. Angry. All right, here on your last 5 minutes. Glad everyone is enjoying themselves, or at least I hope you are. Great stuff in the discussion in the chat that I'm seeing. So the last thing I want to talk about was actually just something freeballing. Thinking of it right now, we're going to talk about liberalism. And so liberalism actually goes well within how individuals labor themselves, their scheme of life, the ownership of production, because liberalism is also nationalism. Also, and liberalism and nationalism go hand in hand like left and right hands, right? They go with each other like peanut butter and jelly, like fat kid and cake. Like you cannot separate these two. You would have just uninformed meanings. You would have incomplete meanings of either or. So liberalism and nationalism, the crux and the poison when it comes to organizing movements. Because the only reason we need to organize movements is to exist antithetical to a particular process or a particular entity or a value. And so liberalism stands as that antithetical value that we organize, because liberalism wants to keep these systems of capital and the deterioration of capitalism, the evolution of liberalism, fascism, right? Just another flavor of liberalism, which preserves capital. And we do not like the preservation of capital. We like the destruction and abolishment of private property and capital. So liberalism as an ideology, right? The right to own stuff, like rights. There's a bunch of rights when it comes to liberalism. Liberals like rights. They like due processes. Basically, everything that America says is good, the liberal likes, because America is on that system. It's on that due process, judiciary. You must follow the law, must follow the rights. Whatever's in the law, you must follow and state. But as we know, laws are inherently moral, right? There was a law at one point regarding slavery or so and so that you could own. Right? Owning slaves is not moral at all, but it is just a law. And the liberal, right, living in that time would push that law because it conforms to the societies and establishments in place that allow for the scheme of life to materialize. So that scheme of life way back when in the 1800s when slavery was still popping off, people were out there advocating as they do now with ban trans people and such, or the abortion laws or whatever you want to talk about. The conservatives, they were doing that, but to a more extreme, at least from our perspective, way back when. But it's all common to liberalism and how the liberal interacts within their nation state. And so the liberal, of course, sees no problem with our mode of production, so therefore sees no problem with how labor is owned, how AI is created, how technology is implemented into our modes of production. So the liberal, of course, wants to maintain all of that, systems and processes for individuals to own, to get exploited, because it is just here. It is already here, right? We must reform the existences of such entities because these systems and entities already exist. They're already here. They're here, thrown in. Why remove any? Because the removal of or the abolishment of any of these systems is aligned with, let's say, anarchy. All right, let's say with the destruction of the system leads to the world ending or some crazy notion. Right, because the consideration of alternative has not been that well developed, right? Because the individual only knows what they are, right, in their material conditions. Individual wouldn't know an alternative if they were never presented with an alternative. And that's also why we're here, right? We're talking about labor, reproduction, deconstruction, a little bit on liberalism, right to own production, and the means to work and own, right to work, and all that stuff, right? We're all here. We're all yapping it up, understanding each other, trying to figure out what our place is in the world, and trying to figure out our politics most importantly, because we're at that stage in life where most people engage in politics and don't want to. They feel like they're forced to, which is what bourgeois politics, I believe, are designed to do. No one likes to get in bourgeois politics unless you like the profit motive, and if you like the profit motive, you're just, I would say, not a good person. So that's why our politics are filled with that's just that bad energy, because it's a profit motive. There's a bourgeois motive and initiative backing our politics in its current state. So what we do here is to attempt and hopefully reproduce those good qualities of politics, the community aspect of politics that we need to bring in, right? Removing the profit motive, removing the bourgeois incentive and the bourgeois aspects of our politics, which is why we're here. So 1 minute till. Thank you all for being here, listening to me yap. If you have any questions, anything like that, let me know. DM me, drop it in the chat. We can answer some. I'll be here for a couple minutes after. But now that it has hit that 1 hour after, thank you all for so much for being here. I'll be here, and we'll be here next week, every Wednesday at the same time, so long as I have means of getting on this damn Discord. So thank you very much, and I hope you all have a beautiful rest of your day. Thanks.
Thank you. I have a question.
Yes.
So, do you suggest that we aim to 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 financial freedom?
Yeah, financial
Is
freedom. Yeah,
that, yeah.
yeah. Financial freedom for the individual is always a go. Because financial freedom in our state means freedom from the from oppression in a way. But ultimately, financial freedom relies on the systems of bourgeois or capital, right? There would be no financial freedom in a socialist society. Everyone would inherently already be quote unquote free from finances, because you need finances to sustain your material conditions like a house, food, and water. But of course, in our current condition, we always advocate for financial freedom in any way that you can that isn't exploitive or that doesn't reproduce capitalist agenda. So attaining
Mm,
financial freedom through a business, like through a for-profit business, and how, like, you're not necessarily exploiting your employees in your business, but the inherency of a business is for the profit motive. Sustaining your
mm,
financials through that,
yeah.
kind of gray. But of course, we always advocate for financial freedom for individuals in the ways that they can that help, a revolution, or that help our proletariat needs.
Mhm. I have another question.
Oh yes,
So you mentioned liberalism is
yes,
nationalism.
yes.
And liberalism is the right to own stuff, right?
Liberalism is an ideology that believes in just general rights. Individuals have inherent rights, like they are born with, and some of those rights are the right to own, the right to work, the right to do stuff because the individual is born is here, right? So their
Mhm.
individual rights, just because they're born, they have these. I would say superfluous or extra rights. So the individual isn't born with the right to own anything. They're just here and they're born. The individual has a right to water because individuals need water to live, but I don't think individuals have the inherent right to own production or right to work in production of that manner. So liberals have generally believe in rights, believe in nationalism and states' borders, due process, just a bunch of stuff that equates to what we see in the systems of capital right now. So if you want to understand what a liberal is, you just look at the Democrats, and that's a liberal.
Mm.
Does that
And the
answer your question?
opposite, and the opposite is fascism.
They're in line. There's two sides of the same coin. Liberalism and fascism are about the same. When you scratch a liberal, a fascist bleeds because when you provoke a liberal, then their true intention of their being comes out. So even so, when the liberal wants to establish rights and freedom and autonomy, they want to do it in a certain capital way, or I guess a way that aligns with capitalism, the modes of production that are voluntary, because inherently capitalism is a voluntary action kind of system, a mode of production. And so individual liberals, when they bleed, fascists will hawk and make sure that we do production in such ways. And those ways are voluntary in the capitalist society. So liberals and fascists align or capital aligning, which is where we get our rub, which is where we get, yeah, I don't really like liberals.
Mm.
So those answer your questions?
Um, I'm not sure, but let me say it in other words. So you mean liberals can be fascist too, right?
Yes.
Yeah. To keep the capitalism, right?
Yeah, all in efforts to keep the capitalism, keep the current mode of production. It's like conservatism. So you want to keep the current stuff. So it's like yeah, being conservative. So liberals and conservatives are on the same wing of ideology and production, right? When most people try to make the difference that yeah, being conservative is to the right of liberals, but the entirety of liberalism and conservatism in American politics is all in the same wing, right? The same right
Mhm.
side of politics, the same right side of capitalism, where the left starts at anti-capital thought. So abolishing capitalism, abolishing private property and such.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you.
Of course, as we see fascism in Germany all those many years ago, that was fascism. Italy in the same time period, that was fascism.
Mm.
Hey, Jaden.
Hey, Day.
I was wondering if you can just expand on our strategy as far as when you talk about when we talk about season of means of production and so forth, about our strategy of withholding our labor, purchasing power, and so forth, how that ties into obtaining, power for the proletarian and for the people.
Oh, okay, no problem. So when we withhold our labor, just like with divesting, we're withholding it and reinvesting it somewhere else. So we're actively pushing our labor to divest, quote unquote, from the systems of capital, from our paychecks, from our bosses, from these enterprises, and into products that the individual creates for the purposes of helping our proletarian needs. So we came up with an action package, or we're developing it, and so we own the means of producing these zines, or at least I contract quote unquote other companies to print and make these, but I fold and label and use a shipping carrier. But the means of production and seizing the means of production just means that individuals have the means to produce whatever they need to. So seizing the means of production, like with our action package, we seize the means, or I guess we have the means of producing zines. So we can make these zines whenever we want. We just need to have the money, of course, to make them. But we're not blocked by some sort of enterprise saying that you can't make zines. We own that production. We own those means to produce. So when it comes to seizing the means of production, we are attaining the means at which provide those necessities for us. So when it comes to seizing the means of production, we're obviously talking about the seizing the means of producing clean water, the seizing the means of producing safe to eat food. And how we do that is, I want to say incrementalism, but getting as many things as we can within our own power. So with these zines, we can make these, right. We don't contract like a whole entire business to make these for us. Not like drop shipping. Drop shipping is a horrible business model. But the owns the means, the produce and production can start in your kitchen. You can start making your own bread. You don't have to rely on a store to go to buy your bread. You can make your own bread. Well, of course, if you want to buy your ingredients from a store, then that's kind of like, oh, double dipping, but that's like not. Well, anyways, I get the ingredients from the store. I can make my own bread. I know how to make bread. I know how to make food. I can start in your kitchen. You're owning production. You can make a lot of things. You can make a farm. You can own the means to produce crops, right? So it's not just industrializing your entire lifestyle. So owning the means of production just means it owns the means to produce. And as a mechanic, and I'll say this a lot, I own the means to produce the right, or the repair. So I can repair a vehicle. You don't have to go to a shop, like if you come to me, to pay an exuberant bill to have your car fixed, because I know what it takes to produce a repair, and the means of producing a repair is two things: tools and the mechanic. So long as you have the tools and the mechanic and you own that, you can make a repair on a car, and it doesn't have to cost you thousands of dollars. So which I'm always lenient on my rates when it comes to charging people, because I know how expensive shops can be, and that's what it means to have the means of producing, the seizing the means of production. I technically seize the means of repairing vehicles so that I can help people save money in my area. So it's not just owning the means of this large factory or this large mode of production that runs the world's economy. Means of production starts with the individual, and it starts with however the individual can get away from the systems of capital. Right. So in my case, as a mechanic, I don't go to a shop, pay $3,000 to, have all of my nuts and bolts checked, brakes changed, and alternator changed with the oil change. I can do it myself. I just need to buy the parts, which is a part of the means of production. If I'm able to buy the parts, like we do the ingredients, but you can make the bread yourself, you are step by step taking yourself off the reliance of capital production. So you no longer have to rely on shops fixing your car. You don't have to rely on a bakery owned by a capital interest to make your bread, right? You can grow that stuff or make that stuff yourself. And that's where we start seizing the means of production. It's when the individual starts to become competent within their immediacy of their objects in their environment. So no longer relying on the systems of capital. So it all starts with the individual, right? Whether the individual can fix their own car, style their own hair, transport other people, right? No longer relying on an Uber. Someone or some comrade in an area can give you a ride for free, right? And it is that free aspect that allows for the attractiveness of this mutual aid stuff. Like, oh, what do you mean it's free stuff? But that's just what it means to own production. Owning the means to produce such a repair, such transportation, bread, food, whatever it may be. I know some people do nails for cheap, right? You don't have the means to produce nails. Well, some comrade does, and they'll do it for much cheaper than another private enterprise. But seizing the means of production helps our proletariat values by getting back what we lost. Because individuals who work don't work and produce and get to keep what they produce and worked. They leave all of that stuff at work. So that's a process of alienation we talked about a couple weeks ago. So alienation is when you, let's say, make chairs at work at this enterprise, but you don't go home with any chairs to sell. That's all up to the business. So imagine this: you sweat, you labor, you worked, and what do you bring home? Your sweat, no labor, and none of your work. That's the process of alienation. That's the process of how individuals separate themselves from the products which they produce that work. It doesn't have to be a product. If anyone here is into code or they do cybersecurity, anything online, the coding like that, the product that you produce is your code. And that code gets to be kept by the enterprise. So what do you go or leave home or close your laptop to? No code. That's all owned by the enterprise. And so alienation is a great concept to understand when it comes to seizing the means of production. It means having that power back into the proletariat's hand of producing and making things. Because nothing's worse than having a proletariat or having a revolutionary force that doesn't know how to make stuff, you know? So we must have that ability to make stuff in order for our revolution to materialize. That's what I'm saying. I know, right? That was all from the dome
Absolutely.
too.
Thank you for that, Jaden. Definitely speaking volume to us striving towards collective sustainability. Everyone having a role to play in this movement, depending on your capabilities and your strengths and your weaknesses, and we all pick up the load where others are not so strong in, but we continue to strive towards transforming this society towards one that benefits all people and not just a few, and also respects the planet, the only home that we have.
That's what I'm saying. When we live in a finite world too, like capitalism is an infinite ideology trying to materialize itself in our world, just as dialectical materialism and communism is a finite ideology and material, concept trying to materialize in the world, which is, I would say preferred, right? We're not trying to build 10 million things because someone thought of it. That's like capitalism. It's infinite ideology trying to materialize itself in a finite world. It's like people trying to pursue billions and trillions of dollars of profit when those trillions and billions of dollar profit don't exist, at least yet, right? They're trying to seize what is not there, trying to materialize to some capacity an infinite ideology in a finite world, which is also where we get that contradiction. Contradiction of infinity in a finite world. It's like one of the main big things when it comes to anti-capital thought. It's understanding that we can't make trillions and gajillions, bajillions of dollars of profit if there's a finite to the world. That's where we get inflation. That's how inflation occurs, or at least the concept of inflation. It's where you try to materialize infinite profits in a finite world.
What about relying on small businesses instead of big corporations?
So that's a good step, but the essence of a business itself is for profit. So what most socialists try to strive towards is a co-op. So it's a cooperative where owners own the business, and the business is still profit motive. But now that the workers own the business, or they own the means of production, the profits go towards the workers. So no more is there a private interest like in relation to the workers in production in that company. Now the workers own that company, they own that production. So whatever you buy from that company, that small business, right, if it's cooperative owned, it will go to the workers. So as far for small businesses though, like small businesses with a boss and then employees and then like a hierarchy structure, they're just mini monarchies or mini big businesses. That's why they're small businesses, because they're still businesses. So when a
Mm.
co-op has a business, the profits go towards the workers. But if the workers aren't proletariat and they're doing it for themselves, it's still bourgeois aligning. It's still
Mm.
private interest technically because there's no publicizing of that profits. So small businesses, I would say, still better than big businesses, but still are businesses. It just depends on how they move that profit. But in our scheme of capital being, I would always still say support small businesses, just like how I would say always support your unions, even though I have
Mm.
critiques and against the union and small businesses. But in relationship, private enterprise or union, I would go with a union. Big business for a small business, I would go with a small business.
Mm-hmm.
Question, comrade.
Yes, comrade.
What is our shared ideology over this server? Does it vary between individuals, or is there one shared collective idea?
We start on the left. It's anti-capital thought, anti-colonial thought. So there's no one big ideology. Me personally, I'm a Marxist-Leninist, but I know that a lot of people have gripes with Marxism or Leninism. But so long as your ideology is left aligning, like anarchy, that's fine.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, so I'm not a big anarchy hater. I don't like anarchy, but I'm not going to go out of my way to be like bash anarchists or Maoists or just any sort of political identity. I think that's silly. But if your political ideology lines right, then that's where we have a problem.
Спасибо, товарищ.
Yeah. So it is 20 minutes after. I'll be in here for 10 more minutes, up to like that half an hour after, and then I'm gonna hop off. So if anyone else has any more questions, something just popped up in the next couple of minutes, feel free to ask. But at 5:30, we'll be making that hard stop.
I got in here late, but so how did this meeting start off, or what was the topic?
So there are a number of topics. We just started with labor, AI, technology, just some terms. We went on to the means of production, talked about reproduction and deconstruction, reproducing socialist values and deconstructing Western values and such. So we went over a little bit, but if you're here for that later portion, that was pretty much it, though.
All right, thank you. So, I guess I do have some things on my mind, because I kind of feel like I'm in limbo lately. But so I don't know. I might rant for a second, and I'm sure that you guys can, just point me to the right resources or direction. But I feel like maybe I'm missing a lot of the news, but I feel like the biggest issue everyone has or we have is that people don't know how to organize, and I don't mean protest wise. We can all run out into the streets and do our protesting, and that's been important in many times in history and now. But like I just sometimes or lately I've been thinking about the millions of people who protested during George Floyd, and that's like amazing. And I just wonder, like, what could have happened if instead or afterwards the million people who showed up there, we all started organizing and help. Well, for one example, like say we help start coordinating with local or small businesses and coordinate with food waste was it resolutions solutions, and just help them take care of that, or just do all these things that like right now, instead of going out and, well, yeah, we should still go out and protest, whatnot. Trump, I think there's like a bunch of protests coming up, but like what if we instead or afterwards focus on making safe spaces for trans and LGBT, and like I think someone mentioned that in the servers, and I obviously we grew up in public school and stuff like that, and we're only taught to listen and not question, and not think for ourselves, work for others, wait to be told what to do. So I understand that organizing is not in our nature as much anymore, but I'm wondering if there's a way where we can make it easier or make that education more accessible, or implement it into every subject or topic, because I just sometimes wonder, like I said, I feel like I'm in limbo.
Right, we hear you, comrade. It is hard to have these conversations in real life, especially when, with what you just said, just wait for someone to tell you what to do, don't ask questions and such. It's all baked within the scheme of life of our beings, of how we live and be. So to break that, also the ice or breaker, is to just start the conversation. Is when we do stuff, because when people do stuff, stuff happens. But it does feel like you against the world when you're out there doing it by yourself. Especially like even if you're in an organization, if you're just out there with a group of people, it just still feels like it's you and your bunch of friends or a bunch of organizers against the world, and that's how it's always going to feel. But we do have some resources that we're trying to get out in the form of our zines to help with that ice breaking. So as we're constructing these zines for everyone to help distribute and have a collect or decorate with, these will be the tools. I'll even turn my camera on. I still have them here. Oh yeah, look at the camera's taking a little bit. But so I have the zines right here, and those zines I'll post more pictures in the that project chat. But yeah, these zines are here to help us break that ice, build that community, deconstruct those Western and those childhood education rules and laws that we have been exposed to. Don't ask questions, do what you're told, listen to your higher ups and whatnot. So we'll be doing this. So you can't see it, but these zines will be distributed and sold, and as a fundraising effort and as a communal building effort. So we understand your frustration and struggles and lost feeling. Everyone's been there. We're kind of all in there in that space right now, especially with what's happening right now in our politics. But we appreciate the energy, comrade. We appreciate your space, your being, and we're hoping to organize in ways that fulfill that that void, that feeling. So stay strong. We're always here every day. Avoiding burnout, of course, very important, and we're also here to help each other out as a part of that avoiding burnout.
It's good to hear. Thank you so much.
Of course.
Just to add on that as well, Priscilla, I like when you said you mentioned creating third spaces and actual concrete results that we can actually utilize, and that's definitely a focus here as far as creating that power within our communities to where we can gain some independency from our current overlords.
So to recap, we are um, what is the word? Encouraged to share our teachings amongst others.
Yeah, spread the news, have fun, strike up conversation, get a liberal mad or something. I don't know.
Yes. More along the lines of skills to give to one another.
Yeah, we want to build up our skill set, our ability to produce, and our competency as a revolutionary class, so that we are all able to help each other out when the time comes.
Yes, yes. I was wondering what would be the platform for sharing those skills? For I am an engineer. I also know combat medic skills as well as other things. But I'm not sure how to share that amongst people on a widespread, you know.
So sharing skills is a skill itself, right? Especially online. So it's a skill that you can develop. There are platforms that allow you to. Right here on the Discord is one avenue. There are some places where you can make money off of that skill that you can sell to people, or you can just go on TikTok or another avenue. But I'm interested in developing a platform that we can help people with, just like yourself, who wants to help provide those skills to people, just don't know who to provide it to or how to provide it. I'm interested in trying to develop a network that uses existing platforms to help you with that.
You could try Reddit. I know it's got a bad rap, but it does work for a lot of people.
Oh yeah, Reddit does work for sure.
I mean, yeah, it's a really useful um, platform if you use it correctly. Yes.
Yeah, everything has a good and bad cycle. It just depends how you observe it in a particular relationship. So skills being taught is bad if you're trying to make the individual population conform to your policy. But of course, sharing skills is good as it helps everyone become educated. But now that
Yeah.
it is at that 5:30 ish mark, at least for me, that hour and a half after, I will be doing a hard stop. So thank you all for being here, especially for being here after. We will be doing this again next week at the same time of 4 p.m. East, 4 p.m. Pacific, and 7 p.m. Eastern. So without further ado and without too many delays, thank you all for joining here, and I will see you around the Discord, and I will see you around later. Thank you so much.
Night. Thanks.